like the Paris Agreement, the critical questions that stand out today is how countries can simultaneously achieve the goals of these two landmarks agreements. This is even more so as stakeholders continue to underline the necessity of looking for climate solutions that tackle the intertwined issues. We all recall the COP27 held in Egypt, and of course the COP15 of the CBD. COP27 was on climate change, and then COP15 was on the CBD. Both demonstrated the need for synergies between the biodiversity and climate agendas. For instance, part 6 of the GBF, or the Global Biodiversity Framework, highlights the need to promote coherence, complementarity, and cooperation between the Convention on Biological Diversity and other relevant multilateral agreements, and indeed international institutions, respecting their mandates and create opportunities for cooperation and partnership among the diverse actors to enhance implementation of that framework. And so to this end, we consider it necessary to explore how synergies could be built between climate and biodiversity strategies, especially at the national domestic level, with a view to achieving the goals and targets that have been set by the two conventions and indeed by the countries. This is even more so since climate change is one of the key drivers of biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss per se or in itself aggravates the challenges of climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, we consider it appropriate to bring understanding in these landmarks as to how synergy, as to how they can be implemented integratedly. Ladies and gentlemen, for African countries, we know how vulnerable we are and the challenges we have with resilience. Understanding the interconnections between biodiversity and climate change, and indeed exploring the potential to foster synergies in the implementation of the strategies or plans, we consider this very relevant to achieving the commitment to these two landmark conventions. In addition to meeting those landmark conventions, we will also be in position to deal with the challenges associated with climate change and, of course, biodiversity loss. Such understanding provides, as emphasis, a veritable platform for an integrated approach at the national government level, which to us, we've seen as the best strategy for effectively implementing those two landmark agreements. Ladies and gentlemen, given the current emphasis on nature-based solutions, for instance, and the importance of protecting and restoring nature to address climate change, overlap measures are inevitable, whether as shown out by nationally determined contribution or as we have in the national adaptation plans, and indeed, national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So there is need to promote coherence if we must ensure that various actors work together. This has given us the basis or the trust for the series of webinars, workshops, trainings, just name it, which will be coming up. The primary focus will be promoting coherence between climate actions and biodiversity strategies. And this is the first of the series of the webinars or workshops that will be coming up, organized by Nigeria Conservation Foundation and Natural Eco Capital, as well as support for sustainable environment, food, and agriculture initiative, Capital's Coalition Hub, African Union, and then ACMAD. Of course, we know there are other strategic partners that will be coming in as we open the space up for everyone to be part of this very webinar or workshop series. For this webinar for today, the theme is building coherence for African businesses between climate actions and biodiversity strategies. How do we build that coherence? What is the nexus even? So specifically, this webinar will assist us to identify the convergence between the various instruments for managing climate change and then biodiversity loss. In addition, it will help us to understand the commonalities and differences between the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework. If you participate in it, your understanding generally as businesses will be strengthened. Strengthened to understanding the interconnections between biodiversity and climate change from that business perspectives. And of course, how we can all act in the various countries that we have found ourselves and indeed support the countries in meeting their targets. Ladies and gentlemen, we have experts that have been identified to speak at this very webinar. So we encourage you to pay that rapt attention as we call on them to speak. Please, like we said earlier, mute yourself. Let's have a session that is not disturbed in any way. If you have any question, please insert it in the chat box. If you have comments, please also do that. There will be a space for us to voice our opinion when we get to that session. So ladies and gentlemen, please, once again, let's pay that rapt attention. My name is Dr. Eugene Itwa. I'm the CEO of Natural Eco Capital. I'm also the regional coordinator for West Africa Capitals Hub. It's part of Capitals Coalition. You can Google that and then get more information on that. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I tell you, welcome. And one of the critical issues that we're looking at is the opportunities for the African businesses. Opportunities in the landmarks commitment. For us to understand this, I would like to call on Dr. Elvis Tuger, who is the coordinator Bring Great War in African Union Commission. Dr. Elvis, I think everyone is waiting to hear you.
Yes, hi, Dr. Itwa. Good morning, good afternoon from Addis Ababa. Are you getting me?
Loud and clear.
Yeah,
Loud and clear, and we can see your video now as well. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, so thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for organizing this very important webinar. I believe this is really very important, especially to enhance understanding of this very important multilateral environmental agreements. This is invaluable because most of our communities, most of those
Dr. Elvis, your voice is a bit muffled. We can't hear you very well again.
Okay, I will switch off the video because the bandwidth. You getting me better now?
Loud and clear.
Yeah, so as I said, this series of webinars that you are organizing are very, very important because our governments and our organizations get into these global multilateral environmental agreements. And most of the time, those who are supposed to be implementing them and those who are impacted by these strategies and by these engagements are in the dark. As far as concerning the Paris Agreement and the Kunming-Montreal CBD global framework, I think, as you rightly said, these two are mutually reinforcing. They are similar to each other. If you look at the 23 target of the Kunming-Montreal agreement, and you look at the 24, 23 goals of the Paris Agreement also, you realize that if you analyze them critically, they're talking about one thing. They're all looking at the issues of enhancing nature-based solutions. They're all talking about the need to combat climate change, be resilience, and also combat manifestations like land degradation, neutrality, and things like that. So these two are the same. But my topic here was to look at the issues of a business case. What was the business potential for Africa in these two multilateral environmental agreements? I think, Dr. Eugene, this is very, very important that we see climate change, we see environmental degradation from another lens, for the lens of opportunity, because these global agreements present huge opportunity for development, for enhancing technological transfer, for creation of wealth, and for resilience of our community. And I can say this is exactly what we are doing within the framework of the Great Green Wall here at which is led by the African Union. In terms of business opportunity, let me just give you a few aspects. The first aspect that you see in the Paris Agreement is that of finance. And when you look at the global framework for biodiversity, you see that the first goal is that of finance mobilization, which means we have huge opportunity here for businesses. Finance mobilization, there are two kinds of finance. You have the investment finance, you have the grant, and then you have the blended finance, which is about providing seed funds for preparation, and then you have business investment. And we have several organizations that can provide these finances. We have the GEF, the Global Environment Fund. We have the Green Climate Fund created for climate change. We have the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the IFAD. We have several funds available that are there for takes, both at the level of grants for communities, for seed funds, and we also have investment and blended financing. Blended financing here, a mixed basket of financing that private sector as well as the public sector can have access to. Another aspect of these two global agreement, my brother Eugene, is the issue of technological transfer. If you look at the framework, they talk here about implementation tools, and this is all about technological transfer. Same in the Paris Agreement. The technical transfer here is very, very important, and it's also a very, very good area for business development. If you look at, for instance, just green energy transition, you look at transitioning from fossil fuel to renewables. If you just take one of them, the solar energy, to put it like that, or this is about, is estimated about, these are billions of dollars opportunities just at the level of energy transfer, and just taking one energy sector, that is renewables. We have thermal, we have all kinds of renewables. Another areas of opportunity is that of skills. technological transfer is also about sharing skills, training, education, information, the making use of ICT, internet and communication technology development. So we have all of these opportunities that are there for us. We have now the upcoming of electric cars, transforming our dirty means of transform into renewable, the use of battery. These are huge area of opportunity for wealth creation, for jobs, and for transformation of our society. And these sectors are getting more and more affordable and cheaper. So those who get involved in them now are the winners. If you look at another aspect of it, they talk, especially looking at the CBD framework, they talk a lot about traditional knowledge, or what we would generally refer to as individual knowledge, and the need for benefit sharing mechanism. But Eugene, you know that there have been a lot of abuse of our indigenous knowledge. Our indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, they have been sidelined by global science, but today they are being recognized as one of the biggest areas of opportunity. So this gives our traditional rulers, the custodians of our traditional knowledge, our grandparents in the village, our people in the communities that have this knowledge, conservation knowledge, adaptation knowledge, mitigation knowledge, the use of nature-based solutions to provide services to the community. All this knowledge has to be paid for. There is the issue, if scientists want to leverage this knowledge, digitize them, they need to pay for this knowledge. So the recognition of our traditional knowledge, of our indigenous knowledge, is also very important, and it's a huge business case for our communities. But this can only work well if our governance, our national governments, our local decentralized administrative government put in place the necessary enabling environment that we can build on. We need to do that. So I think for this first intervention, Eugene, I would end up by saying, look, climate change, biodiversity degradation, these are huge challenges for us. Their impacts are existential threat to the very existence of our communities. We have seen the increasing competition for natural resources. But I will tell you that if you flip the coin, these are also huge areas of opportunity for development, for skills, for business, for the transformation of our economy. And that is what we are doing within the framework of the Great Green Wall. The Great Green Wall is about enhancing nature-based solutions to combat desertification, degradation, especially the application and use of indigenous and traditional knowledge. We are in Nigeria. We are in 11 states in the north, in the northern part of the countries. We call them the 11 frontline states. We have the national agency in Abuja, and we are working with the Ministry of Environment and all the other related ministries to ensure that we take on a synergistic approach, not only at the national level, but also at the continental level. It is also good to say that we also
I don't know. Can anyone hear him again?
I think we lost him.
Yes.
He's no longer audible.
He's back. He's back. Yes. Dr. Evans, we missed your voice for a while. Hello, Dr. Evans. Thank you very much for that. And I know you were actually rounding off. I will not want to take, we heard him very clearly. He started by actually helping us to understand that there are commonalities, there are opportunities as well, which was actually his key focus. Interestingly, one of the things he talked about was indigenous Knowledge opportunities. Perhaps not so many of us have given attention to that. But in re-emphasizing our understanding of the commonalities, the convergence, the differences, or whatever that we have between these two landmark commitments, the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework. The key question we will want to give a response to now is, what is the nexus between these two landmarks? To assist us to understanding this is the Director General of Nigeria Conservation Foundation, Dr. Joseph Onoja. Dr. Onoja, I think, again, we are all waiting to hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Eugene. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, thank you very much. I am good morning from where I am, and good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. It's a pleasure to be here and also to discuss this very, very important issue. Humanity is faced, as we said, with the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. And the earlier we start looking at it as the two sides of the same coin, then the easier it is for us to tackle it, because we cannot tackle them in isolation. You see, if I'll give a bit of background of the Paris Agreement, it is a replacement of the Kyoto Protocol, which was not very successful when it was when it was signed, because the main polluters were not, didn't really go with it. But luckily for us, the Paris Agreement has more bites, because a lot of other countries actually signed on to it, and which is very important for us. And we're talking about climate change. We're lucky last year in Montreal, after the protracted dragging because of COVID, we finally had the Global Biodiversity Framework, which was signed into law. For us, it was also a Paris Agreement, if I'll put it that way, because we have the Global Biodiversity Framework and we have the Paris Agreement. As Dr. Elvis rightly pointed out, when you put them side by side, the targets and goals, you find that they are almost answering themselves. So there's no way they can divorce biodiversity loss and climate change. The effect of biodiversity loss is exacerbating climate change. And the effect of climate change is exacerbating biodiversity loss. So for us to be able to answer climate change or mitigate climate change or adapt to climate change, we must improve biodiversity conservation. And for us to be able to improve biodiversity conservation, we must fight climate change. So it is a two-way thing that we need to look at, and we need to ensure that we answer them. So for instance, when you look at the overarching goal of the Paris Agreement, that is keeping the temperatures below 2 degrees. How will it keep the temperature below 2 degrees? We have nature to be able to absorb excess greenhouse gases. So how do we find nature in biodiversity? So by the time we are able to improve the conditions of biodiversity, it helps in answering the impact of climate change. And by the time we're able to improve the nature, it helps to be able to mitigate climate change. Because if I give a bit of example, because climate change has its effect on the Human Development Index, if you look at it, where we have drought or where it's dry, it's exacerbated, and where it was wet, we have so much wetness. So, but for us to reduce the dryness, we must introduce nature. And by introducing nature, we must look at the greenery in those areas. Even where we have a lot of wetness, then we must introduce a lot of green to be able to make it even less wet. Because sometimes we underrate the importance, especially, let me take forest, for instance, plays. Because when it rains and then there are no trees, what happens is that the rain falls directly to the ground and it causes flash floods. Because when it rains and there are trees, it breaks the current and it percolates gently and it breaks down the runoff. But when there are no trees, we have a lot of flooding happening. And if you find out that it is on a slope, then it causes landslide. But with trees there, it helps in preventing it, holding the soil together. But when we clear the soil and when we clear the trees, it now exacerbates the effect of climate change, because number one, when it rains so much that it will soak the soil on a slope, and then it will have a lot of landslide. And when you talk about the desert areas or the dry areas, the droughts are increasing because the trees have disappeared. The trees that are supposed to maintain the microclimatic condition of that area has now gone, is completely gone. So there's nothing to be able to prevent the effect of climate change. So that is why it's important that when we look at climate change and we look at biodiversity loss, we must look at them as two sides of the same coin, so that as we are answering biodiversity loss, we are also answering climate change effects. And by so doing, we are able to answer them together. That's the only way we will be able to make it happen. And if we look at it, we see that there is a connection, because as biodiversity loss continues to continue to experience biodiversity loss, it increases the effect of climate change. And as the effect of climate change continues, biodiversity loss will also be losing our biodiversity loss. And the danger in all of this thing is that humans, who I describe as the least adapted to live in this world, without our intellect, we are the least adapted to live in this world. We suffer a lot for it. We suffer a lot for it because when we have issues of effect of climate change, we are the ones who are affected. Arable lands are being made into deserts, or arable lands are being washed into the oceans. People's homes are being washed into the oceans because of increase in sea level. And you find out that the temperature becomes unbearable. But when you have nature in place, it kind of reduces the effects. And if we don't have that, then it becomes a major problem for us. And see that as we are answering biodiversity loss, we are also answering the effect of climate change. So I will stop here so that as we continue the discussion, we'll be able to bring up more points as we move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Noja. That was an excellent intervention from you. I must sincerely say, part of what I just picked from you is the vicious cycle that we have found ourselves. That biodiversity loss causes further climate change. Further climate change causes further biodiversity loss. We need to improve nature from what you have just said. And interestingly, I guess in our own elementary geography, we were even told that raindrops, if we do not have grasses covering the surface of the soil, raindrops loosen the soil and then make them to be part of the runoff as erosion. Thank you very much for helping us to understand all of this. And interestingly, if we now understand that there's a relationship, how do we align all the efforts? How do we align effort towards meeting the commitments? Recall earlier we have talked about, for instance, nationally determined contribution. We talked about the National Adaptation Plan, if you remember. We also talked about that. And then we mentioned the other aspect that relates to biodiversity, the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plan. All these are plans. How do we align all of this? What really do we need to do? How do we understand them better? This time we will be listening to Dr. Kamoru Lawa, who will help us to through responses or answers to these questions on aligning our efforts to achieving the targets of these two landmark commitments. Just to let you know that Dr. Kamoru is from, he's the climate change thematic lead in Africa Climate Meteorological Application for Development based in Niamey, Niger Republic. Dr. Cameron, Lawal, again, I think we are all ears waiting to hear. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good morning, Dr. Eugene. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to make a presentation in this glorious webinar. Dr. Eugene, can you please help share my slides, or you allow me to share it from here?
It might be faster if you want to share, but otherwise I have it open already. I can assist to share.
Yeah, please help me share it. Then I will be controlling you like a soldier. Next slide, next slide, next slide.
As long as I obey not of my detriment.
You are safe.
Okay, thank you very much. So you are on now?
Yeah, so thank you very much. I can see it too.
Yeah, so, great.
Yeah, next slide, please. And next slide. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, good morning from Niamey here. We have a very fine weather here today. Presently 31 degrees Celsius because of the rain. In the past couple of days, we've been experiencing above 40 degrees Celsius. So it's fine now. And ladies and gentlemen, I intend to use these slides to raise scientific awareness on impact of climate, specifically how it affects critical natural infrastructures, socioeconomic sectors and ecosystems, then as well as businesses. Then we go on to advocate the development of early warning and early action for all. Next slide. You will know that it's no longer news that our climate is changing. We've all have personal experience one way or the other with how the temperature is getting more and more extremes and how our precipitation is getting more and more heavier. The most interesting thing is how we are coping with a changing climate and this extreme, which are changing or are posing serious challenges to our ways of life. Next slide. Now, the key indicators of climate change systems are well known through atmospheric parameters, such as the temperature that is constantly rising. The ocean too is not left behind, it is rising as well as getting warmer. The precipitation has two ways. It is either drying somewhere and getting wetter somewhere. And the melt at the top of our mountain, and the ice, the glaciers at the top of our mountain are melting off. So depending on where you reside or where you are located, vulnerability differs. From rich to poor, everybody has a stake and how it affects everybody. Next slide. So, next slide, please. So scientifically, we know that our climates are getting more extremes. What you are seeing, the video you are seeing is these are slides of mesoscale convective system that within 3 days last year, July 17, 18, and 19 last year, wreaked havoc on 3 main cities in West Africa. The mesoscale convective system developed over the southern part of Chad on the 15th. It propagated westward and hit Sokoto on the 17th, dropped heavy precipitation, move ahead, hit Niamey on the 18th, hit Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso on the 19th. These 3 major cities experienced massive flooding. And this is in line with what Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said earlier. Next slide, that our climates are getting more extremes and more intense in nature. Well, without going into temperature directly, our temperature with combination of other parameters like wind and humidity are also posing some dangers for us. This daily discomfort index you are seeing are indicators of how
We can't hear you again. Or can anyone hear him?
We can't.
No, I can't. I lost his voice, honestly.
We cannot hear him.
Don't worry, I'm going to look for his voice now. Just mute.
Next slide.
I've seen the voice.
Next slide. Next slide. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We are
Next
there.
slide. Yeah, good. So
This
because there are demand for more climate services, because of the increased confidence in all these services, meteorologists and climate science alike, they are generating more and more products to support socioeconomic activities of our people. Next slide. So, next slide, please.
We are there.
Yeah. So, from the angle of extreme heat events, we have come to realize that these are gateway to devastations, ecological-wise. We are witnessing the extinction of some of our plant species in several nature reserves due to high temperature. And the high temperature has been inflicting drought on us, rendering our environment inhabitable, both and agriculturally unproductive. We have found out that our lakes are being deprived of oxygen, thereby posing serious implication for our food security because the fishes in the lakes are dying. Then high temperature are vectors for communicable diseases as well. So next slide. So when we look at the rainfall, it has socioeconomic impact on all our activities, because whatever we do, we have to factor rainfall into consideration. So any efforts to sustainably increase agricultural production, reduce poverty, enhance food security, protect ecosystem and livelihood in West Africa and beyond, we must account for irregularity in the seasonal rainfall, because excess or deficits of rainfall has its own impact on our environment, society, agricultural and economic damages, be it loss or gain. Next slide. So, in view of this, nations, countries, even local governments are spending enormous amounts to build and maintain infrastructures, and they will continue to do so. Look at Niger, for example. They have the possibility of spending 87% of their GDP to repair ordinary roads because of the climate change hazardous natures. Next slide, please. So what did we do in ACMAD? Next slide. So because of all these problems we are facing, we adopted a climate change detection indices, which was recommended by World Meteorological Organization some way back in 1997. These indices are used for detecting climate variability and extremes. And they assess days in which temperature and precipitation observation are either above or below specified threshold. The indices are 27 in numbers, but we only adopted 22 that are relevant to African climate. Next slide. And most of these indices to the left in black tests are for precipitation, to the right in red tests are for temperature indices. Take, for example, the SU30. those are some days in which our temperature are above 30 degrees centigrade. In Europe, their summer days start from 25 degrees Celsius. So if we in Africa are to take our summer days as 25 degrees Celsius, that means the entire 365 days will be summer days. And that will not be very, very correct for us. So that's good. Observationally, we analyzed a 9-kilometer resolution reanalysis data set for temperature and precipitation. And the red star you are seeing in the map represent the national capitals of each country, while the blue stars are cities that have a population of more than 300,000 people. So for all these more than 1,000 cities, we analyze for each of these cities to see how people with places with large population are exposed to climate change. Next slide, please. So this is for Abuja. The left panel is showing the precipitation indices, all the 11 for Abuja, while the right panel are showing all the temperature indices for Abuja as well. As you can see, each panel has their trend written on in red text on them. And if you look at our temperature trend, the maximum temperature over Abuja, it's increasing by about 1.6 degrees Celsius per century. And that is huge, almost larger than global average. Next slide, please. So decadally, you can see this enables us to see which decade has the highest variability and lowest variability. So here we were able to decipher each from 1950 to 1960, 61 to 70, 71 to up to 2011 to 2020. Each decade stands alone. And if you look at our minimum temperature, you can see the steady rise decade-wise over Abuja. So next slide, please. So we now went into future scenarios as well. Now to go into future scenarios, scientists have learned that it is the global warming is being caused by introduction of excess carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now, we now add first scenario. We call it representative concentration pathways from 2.6 to 8.5. I won't bother the audience with technicality of all this. So here we adopted 15 climate models. Yeah, it's good. It's okay. Next slide. It's okay. We adopted 15 climate models whose performance evaluation has been tested over the African continent, and they are behaving fine. Next slide, please. So, of course, we don't expect all these climate models to predict the same thing. So the left panel is showing you what all the climate models are predicting. The only agreement within them is that all of them are saying the temperature is going to rise. So we filtered it out on the right panel. We picked the maximum distribution and the minimum distribution. That arrow you are seeing is giving us what we call range of possibilities. And that is allowing us to assess uncertainty into the future. Next slide, please. So what we are seeing here is for the first scenario, RCP 2.6 over Abuja, where into the future, if RCP 2.6 scenario is maintained, then the temperature over Abuja for maximum temperature may likely rise on the average by 0.8 degrees centigrade, while the minimum, that's nighttime temperature, will only rise by 1 degree Celsius into the future. Next slide, please. Then we can see that for 4.5 is going good. It's okay here. Prof, doctor, it's okay. Yeah. Thank you. Now, what you are seeing on the left, the blue shading, is showing you the spatial extent of where the precipitation is lowest within the African continent. But we defined the arid zone as those areas where the precipitation is within 1 mm and less than 1,500 mm. And if you look at the left panels, the upper panel is showing you the percentage of land mass year in, year out that is occupied by different precipitation thresholds. And if you look at the bottom panel, you will see that last year alone, those dry areas where we have lesser rains are increasing. They have positive anomaly, while the wet zones, the wetter zones, have negative anomalies. Next slide, sir. So the implication here is that the African landmass occupied by arid zones are expanding, while those of humid zones are shrinking, meaning that more places got lesser rainfall last year alone. This will have great effect on our forest ecosystem. Then this is temperature as well. You will see that higher temperatures are expanding spatially. Places with higher temperatures are expanding spatially, while those with lower temperatures are shrinking in size. Next slide. The implication here is that, next slide, please. Next slide. Good. The implication here is that, no, go back. Let's go back one slide. No, go backward. Go backward one more back. No, we are too fast. Forward. No, forward, sorry, forward. Forward, please. Just one step backward. One step backward, 1 or 2 steps backward, please.
Hello, Buki. Ṣé bó ṣe ṣe èyí bó ṣe ń ṣe ìwà dára?
Hello. Backward.
I think maybe we just take it from there and jump over.
Okay. So let's take that of Abuja here.
We have some
now,
people
what you are seeing here is the return period.
Solomon, please mute your mic.
So
what you are seeing here is the return period of all these extreme events. So we can see that it's going to become more frequent over Abuja, and all these extremes will become an annual event. Forward, please. 1 or 2 slides forward.
Ebi program tí wọ́n ní ká join ni mò ń ṣe.
1 or 2 slides forward.
We are interfering with our program.
1 or 2 slides forward, please.
You want to take care from the damage here, infrastructure, please?
Go ahead. Go forward. Good. So look at this picture, you will see the effect of extreme temperature on our infrastructure. Now, if you look at this video, this is Gbagbalada in Abuja. Everybody that is living in Abuja will be familiar with this bridge. This was in 2020 July, when we have about 40 to 50 millimeters of rain. And these two precious bridges are almost washed away by the flood. Next slide, please. Then this is another village, not too far from Gbagbalada. The entire village was submerged in flood. In fact, we have to navigate this area with the help of a canoe. Next slide, please. Now we can see the erosion effects. Now, thank you, Dr. Eugene. Now, we can see that the spatial sizes of our forest, together with its resources, is shrinking. With this, it is either positive or negative in nature, because new business enterprise with this may spring up. The existing one may fold up, unfortunately, but if they don't want to fold up, they have to diversify or recapitalize to expand. The small-scale entrepreneurs are not protected as well, but they stand to gain if they heed warnings and embrace the culture of using climate forecasts to plan their business. On the Nigeria NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution, well, they are saying that we should shift transportation from cars to buses. Thanks to Mr. President for removing the subsidy on fuel. I think our people are becoming wiser now, and we are trying to improve the way we move around. So then efficient gas generators that will limit our greenhouse gas emission. Then climate smart agriculture and reforestation. All this will introduce new business enterprises. So next slide, sir. So in summary, we know that climate crises are becoming national crisis in Africa. Shrinking lakes, drying rivers, migration that is aiding conflict here and there. Then developments, critical national infrastructures are being affected. Then maintenance become more costly. Then on the scientific end, more weather and climate products are being encouraged through massive capacity building, co-production with the stakeholders, and critical reasoning. Now we are advocating the development and use of early warning and early action for us. We are not enforcing it, but we are encouraging legal enforcement for uptake of weather and climate product services. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Dr. Lawa, thank you so much for that brilliant presentation, helping us to understand the alignment. And indeed, the last few of the last statement you just made was focused, or you had focused on businesses, whether big or small, and the opportunities therein for them, whether in the fight for climate change or the fight against biodiversity loss. Thank you very much for helping us to understand that. And indeed, for all of this, like we have said earlier, there is need to strengthen this synergy between all the efforts. And regulators stand at the threshold of getting this done. We would like to listen to Dr. Zena Pisagi, who is the Environment's focal point, Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and Planning in Nigeria. Dr. Zena, we would like you to say something about how we can foster the synergies between climate protection, biodiversity law, conservation, even restoration, and indeed, how all of this can be done with your support as regulators.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eugene, and thank you all participants present. As I was rightly introduced, my name is Dr. Zena Pisagi. I'm the focal officer for environment from the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Talking about fostering synergies between climate protection and biodiversity conservation and restoration, particularly strengthening regulator support to businesses, I think I would use my position as a government person to speak from the government perspective. For me, synergies basically has to do with institutional linkages. I actually had a presentation that I needed to share, but because of logistics from my end, I couldn't send it to Dr. Eugene, but I think I can pick from what I have actually captured in my presentation. By way of introduction, we all know what biodiversity is, and we know what climate change is. These are very, very close interrelated issues in the environment sector, particularly for us who plan for the environment sector at this side. These two issues happen to be one of the focal things that have been captured in the National Development Plan 2021-2025, which is our guiding principles here in the Ministry of Finance, Budget and Planning. What does the Policy Trust on Biodiversity say as encapsulated in the plan? To secure quality environments adequate for food, health, and well-being, to conserve and use environment and natural resources for the benefit of the present and the future, to restore, maintain, and enhance ecosystems and ecological processes essential for the functioning of the biosphere, where with a view to preserve biological diversity and the principle so optimal sustainable yield in using the country's living natural resources and ecosystems. In the National Development Plan, the issue of ecosystem is quite captured and seen as topmost priority. One of the key areas the ministry is looking at with respect to biodiversity and its link with the climate change is public awareness and promoting understanding of these essential linkages, that is between the environment, the environment practitioners, that's those in government and outside of government, the private sector, the development partners, etc., etc. Biodiversity, as we all know, is domiciled here in Nigeria among different institutions of government. And for me, the only way I can address synergy issues is institutional arrangement. So talking about the institutional arrangements already in place in Nigeria at ensuring this synergy among biodiversity and the climate change issues, we have the Federal Ministry of Environment, which and its line agencies, who also have active roles to play in ensuring this. We have the National Biodiversity Management Agency, which is also a regulatory agency. We have the National Park Services. We have the Federal Ministry of Science and Technology, where we have this Biotechnology Management Agency, which the real innovations with respect to environment issues, biosafety issues are domiciled. Talking about the linkages, like I said, institutional is very, very critical. And except these institutions come together and synergize, I think it is very, very difficult for us to attain that developmental objectives that are captured in what we envisage in the development plan. So what are we doing institutionally? That's across board, all those agencies of government and non-governmental agencies that have to do with biodiversity. What are we doing in here? There is the issue of prevention of large scale of loss of biological integrity, focusing both on ecology and human health. And this is to protect the human population from harmful incidents. Failures to do this would obviously bring about health hazard, which we do not want in the country. In that case, we have the Biosafety Management Agency of Nigeria, which is charged with the responsibility to ensure that. We have the responsibility also to ensure adequate level of protection in the field of safe transfer, handling, and use of generically modified organisms, GMSs, resulting from modern biotechnology and other new and emerging technologies, as the case may be. All these responsibilities or activities are domiciled in the Biosafety Management Agency. Coming to climate change and the Climate Change Council, they are also saddled with the responsibility of ensuring that climate concerns are effectively handled to the level that it does not cause more economic damage to the country, but rather add to economic growth and development. The Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning has been in the business of planning for the environment generally, and biodiversity and climate change are very critical priorities as far as the National Development Plan and even our budgetary processes are concerned. The difficulty encountered usually from the ministry side is how to coordinate these very critical but cross-cutting issues that cut across different ministries, departments, and agencies of government. So the issue of coordination is very, very key. As I would always say, when I'm talking about sector issues, I talk about coordination as a very key area. Why is coordination necessary? If these activities are not well coordinated, at the end of the day, it will result to loss of resources. By the time Biosafety Management Agency is doing what Biotechnology Development Agency is doing, or what the Climate Change Department or even the council itself is doing, you discover that there will be a repetition of activities which will not save government costs. Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, apart from the issue of sector planning, also talks about financial planning. So for me, it is very, very critical to foster these synergies. How do we go about fostering synergy? I think number one is capacity building and sensitization. Let institutions understand that issues of biodiversity and issues of climate change is a national issue. It has nothing to do with who is responsible for what. Resources sharing is also very critical because that's where you begin to see lack of synergy. A particular agency, for instance, will be thinking, by the time I don't, hold solely responsibility for this, it means resources coming to that particular aspect will not come to me. No, in coordination and synergy, you discover that 3 or 5 different organizations are doing similar activities, which if harmonized, it will bring about good results. So my presentation today is just to state clearly that issue of synergy is very, very critical. It is critical because by synergizing, we'll be able to arrive at the destination of economic growth and development. Also, bearing in mind that biodiversity has a direct bearing with climate protection. There is an urgent need for the Climate Change Department and other relevant biodiversity regulatory agencies to work hand in hand towards ensuring conservation, restoration of biodiversity, as well as business support for enhanced economic growth and development. And with the area of institutions I have mentioned, I don't know if I did, Federal Ministry of Agriculture has a component of biodiversity and climate change, Ministry of Health has, Education has, and so on and so water resources has. So how can this area of institutions come together and collaborate and synergize and identify the critical areas where they think that biodiversity, climate change are brought together on the same table with the hope or with the belief that resources, from supporting organizations can come timely and also address the issues as it is. So for me, on a concluding and probably final note, we say efforts should be taken by relevant government agency, which is here, I'm referring to my ministry, Finance, Budget and National Planning, to take up its coordination mandate towards ensuring synergy among these relevant agencies in actualizing the mandates, leveraging on participatory collaboration among such agencies. The Ministry of Science and Technology, the Federal Ministry of Environment, the Federal Ministry of Agriculture, among others, so that it can ease implementation of biodiversity programs for the attainment of economic growth and development. Also, finally, I would like to talk about the funding arrangements. At some point, we are talking about a coordinated national financing framework for critical activities such as biodiversity or climate change. I would rather even say green financing generally. Do we have any coordinated framework that talks about the kind of financing going to biodiversity, the kind of financing going to climate change, and so on and so forth? So with these few points I've been able to present, I request that we do put in more efforts in ensuring that there is synergy among particularly institutions that are dealing with these key sectoral issues, biodiversity and climate change as it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I believe the synergy will further strengthen businesses, create enabling environments, policies, plans for businesses to thrive. Thank you very much for that erudite presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier we have said that if you have any question, comments, remarks, insert in the chat here. I know a number of us have done that. And one had actually asked, will these presentations be shared? The recording will be shared. And Professor Ekpere, our mentor, thank you very much. Professor Ekpere was at the time the Executive Secretary, OAU, now African Union, /STR. Thank you very much. And some of the comments you had actually made, it's this. I would like to read it out. You said, congratulations to the organizers of this webinar. Possible emerging conventions and protocols, issues of CBD, of biodiversity, traditional / indigenous knowledge, which Dr. Evans spoke so eloquently about earlier, knowledge, ownership, biological resources, beneficiary, etc., as they could interface with climate change, is articulated in the OAU or African Union model law. I suggest it as a resource for this discussion, particularly as it relates to biodiversity loss occasioned by climate change, etc., and impact on rural community, livelihood and welfare. Nigeria needs to domesticate, and indeed other countries in Africa, these international conventions and protocols to benefit from global financing. Government action is a share, and that is why we brought the regulator to speak on how they can strengthen this relationship, building the synergy between these two landmarks in terms of implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, we need, let me just check if we have any question, because I cannot see anyone. Because if we are to leave the floor for people to speak. Okay, there's a question here from our good friend, Muyiwa Dele. He says, are there any risk associated with using a harmonized approach to addressing climate change and business, biodiversity for businesses? Any risk? What are the risks? We're talking about harmonization. We're looking at the Nexus. So his question is, what are the risks? Could there be any? Any of us here can speak to the issue. Dr. Noja, I don't know if you would like to say something. If I know Dr. Elvis had, unfortunately, a conflicting program that came in between. I don't know if he's still there. Any of you, please, can speak to this.
All right, thank you very much, Muyiwa, for that question. I think the risk that I will see is probably some salient issues will be overlooked if we have an approach, a harmonized approach. But I think in the long run, it will be, for me, I feel that a harmonized approach is better in addressing climate change and biodiversity loss, especially when it comes to businesses, because it's like using one bird to save two. It's like using one stone to save two birds, as I will put it. So that is the way I will look at it, because at the end of the day, you find out that when you have a harmonized approach, your solution on one hand, because you are looking at everything holistically, your solution will not be causing another issues in other places because you are already considering everything holistically. But by the time we don't harmonize, sometimes the solution we are profiling for one issue may be causing or exacerbating another issue in the other side. So I think we are better off harmonizing than having them in a separated approach. So I will advocate for a harmonized approach. And the risk, as I said, may be that some salient issues may be overlooked.
Thank you very much for that very beautiful question. I rather response to the question that was raised by Muyiwa. Is there, let me just check again if there's any other one. I can't see any question here, but I know Okay, I can see Sally Susan. Is it Sally Susan now? No, Bolaji is a fashion entrepreneur. My question, a range of questions in it. Is there any data addressing how fashion waste contributes to climate change and biodiversity? Fashion waste. What can be done to address these issues? And are there resources available for solutions that might address these issues? Those are the two questions he had asked. Is there any data addressing how fashion waste contribute to climate change and biodiversity, and then how these issues can be addressed? Do we have any of us that want to give a shot at this? Dr. Lawa, I don't know if you want to. Okay, Dr. Lawa, please go ahead. I can see your hand.
Yeah, well, presently, I don't know how fashion waste contributes to climate change and biodiversity, but they may contribute to it because presently we are deviating from degradable components to biodegradable components that which half-life processes are very long. So because of the ways and manners we dress now, but we can't do without our fashion designers because they really help us to adapt to the climate. So, but they also should look into the kind of materials they use in designing our fashion devices or whatever. So that is the only thing I can say. But with this question, I think it's worth investigating, and you have given us a lead now, and probably in the next or in the nearest future, you will hear from some scientists. Thank you for that brilliant idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can see Uchena. Let's limit our responses. We have 7 minutes to go, and we will not want to waste. I'll take a minute more of your time. So please go ahead. Just cut it short, please.
Yeah, is it Uche? Am I? Do I have the floor, please?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
The next.
I wanted to respond quickly to the fashion waste. Of course, this is a period where fashion activities has increased globally and locally. So the level of waste generated from the fashion industry has increased significantly, of which we all know. So when waste or pollution has increased, it affects both biodiversity and climate change. So there is a serious interlink between fashion waste to biodiversity loss and climate change issues. So there, of course, just like the last speaker said, there may not have been some significant or some obvious studies that must have been done linking these two things. But obviously, because our behaviors have changed significantly, and not just changing significantly and negatively, our behaviors have also increased in terms of fashion activities, and this results to increase waste for the fashion industry. There's no basic information or basic or guidance or protocols towards ensuring that they don't generate a lot of waste. So this high level of waste that's been generated from this sector has increased or has had a lot of impact on our biodiversity richness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to quickly add that increasingly there are studies that are coming up with data, especially on where you relate it to circular economy. There are data coming out. So it is for us to look for such data and see how they relate to the issues that he just highlighted, fashion. There are people focusing on the fashion when it comes to issues of circularity. So, and that can please, Sally, was it Sally also that had asked that question? You can get further information if you do some search. And then not too long ago, you recall, I think that was precisely last week that the world was celebrating or memorizing, it was the memory or what, how do I put it now? The World Environment Day. It was how we can beat plastic pollution, because someone is asking about plastic. Please, again, I will suggest that we see how we search the internet. There is some of us participated in the marking, and there are new ideas here and there that have been brandished. Please, you can search. Then I have this question. Is there any organization looking at the detection indices rather, for future scenarios for Nigeria and where we can get the data regarding detection indices? Kamoro, I don't know, Dr. Kamoro, do you want to say something on this? Detection indices, detection indices, rather.
Yeah, the African Center of Meteorological Application for Development is massively researching into that. And that is why I've put this link for everyone. And I will put my email as well, so that people can get in touch with me if they have any question. We are really working on that, and we are not even doing it for Nigeria alone. We are doing it for the entire African continent because of the continental mandates that ACMAT has. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Elvis, are you still on the call? Otherwise, Dr. Noja, I don't know if you are in position to say something on this. The question from Akwize is, how is the indigenous knowledge of our people being factored in to generate climate change and biodiversity solutions? Again, at the beginning, Dr. Elvis spoke on this eloquently. Would you like to say something very briefly on this?
Yes, this is one of the points we raised very strongly during the Montreal, the Kunming-Montreal discussion that happened in Canada, because what we're trying to say is that these indigenous people have been living in these landscapes in generations past, and they have been managing the landscapes the way that they should, and they have been doing it with a knowledge that has made us to meet this landscape the way they are today. So it is very important that if we want to continue to manage these landscapes, then we must factor in their indigenous knowledge. And that is getting a lot of traction, because we cannot do it without them, because they are part of the ecosystem and they are part of the landscape of whatever biodiversity hotspots that we tend to conserve. So it's very important that we factor them in, and that is being done very, very much, I must say. Even within the national context in Nigeria, the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, anytime we want to implement projects, we normally do it very much with indigenous people. We allow them to be able to take off. We lead the implementation of whatever program we want to do. We don't come and foist our so-called brilliant ideas on them. All we can do is to improve on whatever they have, but not to come and foist the thing that we think that are good for them. So that is something that is very important and is being factored in, and it will continue to get a lot of traction as time goes on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know that even our colleagues online here have, if you check the chat there, have responded to some of the issues or questions raised. For instance, Elena had talked about, rather than talk about fashion waste, why geoengineering and chemical trail or chemtrail should be addressed, she thinks. And then Professor Ekpere had talked about what Muyiwa mentioned earlier, the risk. He said there are risks associated with different economic objectives of investors given. Thank you very much, Prof. And then Mutiat has said, how can the plastic waste be totally eradicated? Again, I think UNEP released a document. Please check that on how to beat plastics. Then somebody had talked about, I'm looking for that, talked about finance and relates that to what Dr. Zainab had said earlier. And again, Dr. Odeli had said, will you consider Nigeria's reverse nationally determined contribution example of harmonized approach to tackle climate change and biodiversity. As I did, just quickly, the Global Biodiversity Framework wasn't there when Nigeria submitted its, before Nigeria submitted its own updated version. I don't think the principle entrenched in that has been captured. So, ladies and gentlemen, the series of webinars, like we have said earlier, will continue. We'll be looking forward to July series, and then we will notify you adequately. Again, how can we all strengthen the implementation of these two landmark commitments, the Paris Agreement and the Global Biodiversity Framework? That is the question. And we are trying to provide answers for. And today, we have tried as much as possible to provide insight into regarding businesses. We will look at resource mobilization when next we are meeting. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I want to appreciate all of you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
The time is over, so I do not want to take any of your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you. Thank you, Eugene. Thank you very much. Thank you, participants. Thank you, everybody.
The time is over. In position to put on your camera for us to take pictures. How do you mind?
Yeah, we can take pictures. Everybody switch on your camera.
Let's take off this sharing. Can you bring down this? Let's stop sharing.
I'm limiting on the subway.
So let's put our camera, please.
Let's put our camera on for pictures.
I don't know how to do that, but I'll try.
We would like to see you, sir.
I don't know how to do that, but I will try there. Can you see me?
See you, sir.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you now.
Okay.
Mr. Uchi, I hope you are taking the pictures. I hope somebody is taking the pictures. I'm also taking here. Please just exercise patience. We are taking the pictures.
I think we should just take this question and the panelists.
Thank you. Let's take the pictures.
I think she had one.
Good afternoon, sir.
We can only. Okay, so we'll just go quickly. Please come forward. Just these 3 questions and we'll go to the next session.
Thank you very much, everyone, and bye for now.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Yeah, bye.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much, sir. Bye.
This thing wey give me so I go dey use them. I go dey international.
So I quite follow. I am an advocate of before I grow up, just want to that, should I call it the slogan or should I call it the English to use? I love this